Hey guys, welcome back to our second value shading techniques tutorial. Yesterday or in our previous video, we went over the blending technique and also the hatching technique. So today what we're going to be focusing on is primarily cross hatching and stippling. Now, cross hatching is basically just taking hatching, which is lines going in any one direction, and then just crossing them. So what I did for my example here is I had lines that were going vertically and then I crossed them with lines going horizontally. Now you can either keep it vertical and horizontal, kind of like a cross, or you can do diagonals, right? You can do that as well too. And so ultimately what we're looking at is the same type of technique, the same type of finishing point that we want to see, right? We want to see that nice gradual change as we're going through and moving from left to right on our paper. Now, keep in mind, you can always take your paper and kind of move it further away from you and kind of squint at it, right? And you'll be able to determine if you need to add in more values or if you need to take away values, right? And we can't necessarily take away value when we're using a pen. It's not like a pencil where we can just erase out value. But what we can do is if we notice that this is already really light and we want to take away and make these boxes darker, right? We can just add in more lines. So remember, of course, whenever we're working with pen or something that's a little bit more permanent, you want to make sure that you're intentional with your lines, that you're not just filling in a bunch of lines in a bunch of random places, but that you're actually thinking where you're putting the lines ahead of time before you put them on the paper, because you can't easily just erase them out again, okay? So we're gonna be working on our example for cross hatching and stippling. If you would like, what I did for my example is I kind of just grabbed a marker that was a little bit thicker than our normal ballpoint pen. This will just make it easier and less time consuming to do the stippling process. If you'd like, you can still work with a ballpoint pen. It just may take a little bit longer, okay? So let's go ahead and go to our example page. So we already had the first two, that's what you were responsible for in the last video. And so this class period, you will be responsible for doing the example for cross hatching and stippling, and then of course taking a picture and uploading it to our assignment. If for some reason you were not able to print out this page ahead of time, that is okay. You do want to make sure that you have those nice long rectangular shapes that you can go through and create your value scale on. If you have a ruler, I would measure them about 8 inches wide by 1 inch tall. That's going to give you a nice amount of space to work with. And if you're drawing them on your own, you don't have to worry about dividing them into the separate boxes. You can just do one all long rectangular shape. Of course, dividing it into the boxes is always kind of nice because it helps us gauge where our values should be changing. And that's also kind of what we see if we're looking at this cross-hatching example, right? We can gradually see that value changing as it's moving from left to right. And so it's really just an additional tool to help you if you put the boxes in. Again, you don't have to. You can pretty much do this on your own and you'd pretty much get the point of where you should be adding things in, right? So on my previous example, I showed you cross-hatching using lines that were vertical and horizontal, right? So I had lines going up and down, and then I had lines going horizontally from side to side on top. So I'm gonna do cross-hatching, but this time I'm going to do diagonal lines. So instead of my lines crossing like this, they're now gonna cross like this, okay? So when it comes to cross-hatching, you can do either technique. You can do either horizontal and vertical lines crossing, or you can do 2 diagonal lines crossing. The important part is that they are crossing, right? Because it's called cross hatch. A normal hatch is just one line in a single direction. So you can see that all of these lines are going vertically. We could have also done hatching going horizontally. And we could have also done hatching going diagonally, okay? It is completely up to you as long as the lines are all going in one direction. Well, with cross hatching, we have to make sure that those lines cross, right? They're either crossing like this or they're crossing like this. So that is the important takeaway when we're doing cross hatching. So let's go down to our example here. I'm just gonna move my page so it's a little bit more comfortable for me to draw on. And I'm gonna be using my normal ballpoint pen for this. Of course, I'm going to start by putting my lines really close together in that dark area. Remember, the closer we put the lines together, the darker the value is going to be. And as I slowly move from left to right, I'm just going to open up the amount of space that's going on in between my lines. So I'm still putting my lines in that diagonal motion. I just happen to be spreading them further apart from each other as we move to the right side. Okay, remember the right is going to be our lightest value, so we really don't want to go through and put the lines too close together. We want to save that for our dark value. So now that I've done my initial line going left to right, I'm going to go through and start crossing them diagonally in the opposite direction. Again, this is the darkest value box, so I'm going to put them pretty close together. And as I'm moving from left to right, I'm going to slowly start separating the lines so there's more white of the paper coming through. And now I can go through and really adjust. I want these values that are on the dark side to be really, really dark compared to my values over here. So I'm going to work just in this box for right now. And I'm going to put my lines closer together. And you can see as I'm adding in more additional lines, we're losing that white of the background, which is creating that darker value, right? So if we squint our eyes, this box is going to look a lot darker than this box, right? Because I'm letting more white of the paper come in here, whereas I'm really closing off the white of the paper over here. So now that I did that single direction, I can go in the opposite direction. This is going to be my darkest value box, so you can get it almost completely blacked out if you want. And just keep going over until you feel like you've really gotten a dark value. A dark value that you are satisfied with, that is going to be darker than any other box. And now I can start going in and putting in more hatch lines in that second box and kind of slowly creating that gradation in between my boxes. Of course, as we're moving to the left, we're not going to put in as many lines as we had initially here, but I can add them in to make the value just a little bit darker. Remember, we always want to make sure that we have a very smooth gradation. We don't want anything too harsh. We want to see a nice, easy transition between our boxes. And I'm just going to keep going back and forth with my lines until I've decided that I have a nice smooth gradation. You can even let those values bleed over into the other box. So my first box starts pretty much here, but I can still, in order to get that smooth transition, add in a little bit more lines as I'm going into that second box, right? So when we squint our eyes, we should see a not a value change, right? We should have our really, really dark values here, kind of our mid values going into our lighter mid values, and then getting into the lightest. All right, so now I'm going to move on to our second example, and that's stippling. Because of this, I'm just going to change from my ballpoint pen to my marker, okay? And when I'm using my marker, what I'm going to do is actually start from the lightest side. With stippling, I find it's always easiest to start with the lightest value, add in a couple of your dots, and then kind of gradually add more and more as you get to the side. Now you can do it from left to right or from right to left. It really doesn't matter. You can start with the lightest value and then go dark, or you can start with the darkest value and go light. I always like to start with the lightest value. So I'm actually going to flip my paper this way and just add in some dots, making sure they're spaced far apart. And essentially, as I'm kind of going down, I'm just going to be adding in some dots. So making my pattern of dots closer together. And just adding more and more dots as I'm going through each box, right? So as I'm getting to my darker values, I just want to add in more dots, which is ultimately taking up more of that white of the space, right? So we have more white space of our paper here than we do here, which is ultimately affecting our value. And I'm just going to gradually add more and more dots as I'm moving down my value scale. Remember, my lightest value, if I have my paper here, is at the very end, right? So if I flip my paper this way, the top should be the lightest value. And as I go down, it's just going to get darker and darker. Now, we want to make sure that when we're stippling, we don't just move really fast like that, because you'll notice when you do, you start to get areas where the dots kind of move, right? So we have these dots, right? But you can see, like on this one here and this one here, it's not just a dot, but it's a dot where I didn't lift up my pen or my marker all the way. And so now it's kind of smearing, right? So just take your time when you're doing stippling. We want to make sure that we stay consistent with the dots, because that's the pattern that we're trying to create. And ultimately, if you're working with stippling and you are working on a very important project like a portrait or a self-portrait or anything that's supposed to be realistic, we don't want to have areas where our dots kind of look messy. They still should be clean, right? Even though they're dots. So take your time. Don't push down really, really hard on the paper. Just kind of nicely push down. The thing is too, is if anybody is around you and you are stippling and you start going bam, 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 you're gonna make a lot of noise and you're probably going to irritate everybody around you, right? So make sure you're just doing it very calmly, staying close to the paper, staying consistent with your dots, adding them in as best as you can. This is the longest of the value shading techniques. This is going to take the longest. But the thing that I like the best about stippling is that I feel like it's a lot more controllable because we're just putting in dots, right? So we can decide how many dots we want to put in a certain area. It's easy to add the dots. And ultimately, I think it just looks a lot more controlled than some of our other methods, right? So compared to the cross hatching and the hatching, I feel like the stippling, even though it takes a long time, again, kind of looks nicer and cleaner. And we're just going through, and as you can see, it's taking me a long time, right? But that's okay, as long as you stick with the process and have an understanding. Even though it's going to take a long time, it's going to look nicer in the end, right? If you stay calm and stay consistent with your action. As soon as we start getting lazy, that's when stuff starts getting messy, right? And we don't want anything to look messy. That's not going to be good. It's not going to be good for our overall artwork. And keep in mind too that we never want to get lazy with our artwork. So sometimes we'll be working on a piece for a really long time and we may get really bored or we may get really tired, and then you kind of just want to give up on it, right? But the thing is, it's always important at that point to kind of take a break, you know, maybe take some time, take a break, and really go through and kind of reevaluate what you want, how long it's going to take you to work on it, and just, you know, come back to it when you're ready to come back to it. We never want to just give up, and a lot of times I'll see that people start projects and they do a really good job starting the project, but then it comes out to be where they just kind of have given up on the end because they get lazy and they just want it to be finished, right? And you can really tell the lack of effort between when somebody starts something and then when they just finish it to get it finished, right? And so we don't want that to show in any of our artwork. So the important thing is making sure that you stay consistent. If your hand is hurting a little bit, just take a little break, okay? It's okay to take breaks in between our artwork sometimes. You have to do with whatever feels right and whatever is going to hold the integrity of your artwork, right? You never want to start a piece, have it start out being really, really awesome, and then kind of lose that integrity of what you were ultimately trying to achieve through your artwork. So again, it's okay to take a break if you need to take a break, but we want to make sure that we're staying consistent with our design and we're staying consistent with our technique. So eventually, after you do this, and I'm going to go back to my example here, your stippling should look something like this, right? So we should have a nice, easy gradation. You can see I'm starting to get it already where I have my really, really light values on one side, and we're creating more and more dots to create that darker value. And essentially, when you get over to the very far left, or if you're starting at the very far left, it should be almost completely blacked out. Okay, so we really shouldn't see too much of the white area in the background, and you should slowly start seeing a little bit of white as we're transitioning through those first couple boxes. Okay, so you are responsible for creating your example for cross-hatching and for stippling. When you're done, you're going to go ahead and take a picture, upload it to our Google Classroom assignment, and I will see you for the next class.